Hello, welcome to Travel Talks. My name is Kate Sanders. I'm the Director of Alumni Group Travel and Academic Enrichment at the OSU Alumni Association. Our online Travel Talks program invites experts from across the university to learn about the places we travel. Please save the date for some upcoming talks. On March 11th, the Big Fish Lab is going to join us and teach us all about sharks. You may know them for some appearances on the Discovery Channel's Shark Week and National Geographic Shark Fest. It's something that you won't want to miss. And then on April 2nd, travel to Ireland with OSU traveler and wonderful friend and alumnus Elizabeth Bell. She grew up in Northern Ireland and returns there every year, and she's going to tell us all about her wonderful country. And then on May 6th, we have scientists from NASA joining us, all about aurora borealis and the solar eclipse. Laura Edson is the project manager for NASA's Aurora Saurus Citizen Science Project. And so she's going to teach us all about wonderful auroras and solar activity. So don't want to miss any of those, and you can find all the registrations at fororegonstate.org/travel talks. And of course, we'll have links for you too in the summer email after the program. Then, as a reminder, all of our Travel Talks are recorded and they're put online at the Travel Talks site. So you could catch this one and share it with others if you want to, or watch any of the other programs that we have aired. And before every Travel Talks program, I like to highlight just a couple tours. So tonight I want to tell you about a brand new trip. You might have been paying attention to our football schedule and noticed that we are traveling to Boone, North Carolina for the Appalachian State game in October. Well, we decided, why not add a trip to that? So how about going to the Smoky Mountains just before the football game? This is a short 4-night trip. You get to see all sorts of areas of the Great Smoky National Park, the Titanic Museum, and lots more. So this trip is designed to be able to see a little bit of the area and then be able to travel down to Boone on your own for the football weekend. And then all travelers who go on this tour will get free access to our OSU tailgate in Boone. So we will definitely be there celebrating our team. And then this summer, we have some great ones. Odysseys Unlimited is a wonderful tour provider we use often. And we got Journey Through Britain, Canadian Rockies Explorer, and Iceland. So these are always very popular trips. So those are on the schedule as well. And the last one to highlight is Istanbul with Constantinople and the Turquoise Coast. This trip, I went to Turkey recently, and it was a wonderful tour. I absolutely love the country. I'd love to go back another time. This is a wonderful trip of some land seen as well as on the water through cruising. So if you're ever interested in going to Turkey, it's a great trip. Now, all of our tours, of course, are online. As I've said before, the brochure mailings have gotten a little bit smaller. So if you're not getting every brochure for every trip, you can still find them all on our website. So now that our commercials are all over for this travel talk, I'm going to set up a little bit of expectations for tonight's talk first before I introduce David. Just because our current administration in general is so popular these days, and it's an extremely polar topic. Just want you to say that tonight we are going to be sticking to the facts. We have a lot of alumni and friends on all sides of politics, so it'll be a respectful discussion about travel implications and also share some tips on where you can stay informed. So throughout the entire talk, please feel free to type any questions you have in chat or in Q&A. And remember, I do have a power of a delete button, just to let you know. And then if as he's talking, if you come up and think of a question, definitely you can put it in chat. I'll be here in the background helping David to moderate with those questions, and we'll have a bunch of time at the end to address them. So now that all that's out of the way, I want to introduce you to David Bernell. David is an associate professor in political science here at OSU, and he specializes in U.S. foreign policy, international relations, and U.S. energy policy. He has served with the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and the Department of Interior, shaping policy at the federal level. He is also the author of the books, The Energy Security Dilemma, U.S. Policy and Practice, and Constructing U.S. Foreign Policy, The Curious Case of Cuba. His research and experience offer a nuanced view on how evolving politics impact global movement, business, and diplomatic relations. David is not only a much loved and respected professor here on campus, but he has also hosted 2 of our tours. He traveled with us to Cuba, of course, I had to send him to Cuba, and he went to Egypt. David, welcome.
Kate, thank you so much for the kind
You
introduction. I appreciate it. And welcome to everybody this evening or afternoon, I guess we still are, especially since the sun is out here. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm glad to be able to talk a little bit about what's going on with regard to things that you may all be interested in. So please feel free to post any questions you have. Kate and I will be monitoring the chat or the Q&A so we can address any questions that you have. But what I wanted to talk about is that there is a very interesting question that I think a lot of you are interested in, and a lot of people are who are traveling. And this question, which is right now in the process of being answered by travelers from the US going elsewhere in the world, is how are people in other countries responding to Americans who visit there? Because there are, as you know, there are a lot of changes underway right now in terms of how the US is engaging the world and how it's doing so differently than it did under the previous administration and other previous administrations before that, because there's some significant changes. And so this may have some impact on how Americans may find themselves being greeted and received in other countries. And I think there are a few things that are going on right now that are probably going to be things that you'll notice that have an impact. Probably the one of the bigger things going on that people are noticing around the world is that the U.S. is stopping and ending a lot of the foreign assistance programs that it has historically had in place, some of them for many, many years. And the US government now is under the process of reorganizing and significantly downsizing the US Agency for International Development, which carries out a huge number of foreign aid programs. And what has happened now over the last few weeks, and some of this just in the last few days, is that the Trump administration has announced that it's going to be terminating about 90% of USAID's foreign aid contracts. And that's going to result in cutting about $60 billion worth of funding. And so what's happened is the US government has sent out termination letters to a lot of nonprofit organizations, NGOs, and contractors around the world, ending about, I think it's going to be around 10,000 different contracts. Um, so some of them are going to be multi-year USAID awards, and that's going to be cutting, over 50, maybe $55 billion dollars. And then a number of one-time grants are being eliminated now as well. And what this is going to do is it's going to have an impact on a lot of projects worldwide where the United States has been a significant funder. It could be a lot of it is going to be health programs. If you've read about this, if you've been following it in the news, you'll have seen a lot of commentary and stories trying to document where certain kinds of projects are going to be impacted. So it appears that HIV programs, in fact, the biggest one in the world in South Africa, and programs preventing tuberculosis or refugee resettlement, a lot of these programs are going to be either terminated or significantly cut back. And there's still some confusion about which ones will get canceled and which ones won't. And so over the next few days, because it's so recent, people will begin to read more and more about all of these kinds of things. And what this means for you, if you're traveling, is that you're going to find, or you might find, that some people you meet overseas may know someone who is directly impacted, or there'll be 1 or 2 degrees of separation away. And people may want to engage in conversation to ask, why would the US want to do these things that could end up having some harm to people? I teach here in Corvallis in the School of Public Policy, and a number of my own students, mostly graduate students that I have, um, are from overseas. I mean, I have a ton of undergraduate students, but I've got a fair amount of graduate students who are from overseas, places in West Africa, South Asia, South America. And I've spoken to a lot of them in the last uh, few days and few weeks about this. And some of them, trying to ask me about how the US government works and why it's doing things this way, and is it even allowed to do so? I have one student whose brother is the deputy director of the USAID program in all of Bangladesh. And she said that her brother is working with lots of people from the US who have now been told they have to pack up and go home, and they're getting their kids out of schools, and they're relocating back to the United States. So there's a huge number of people who, because the U.S. has such a big reach with its foreign aid program, there may be a number of people who are going to feel something about this and know something about this and want to talk to you about this. And that's one area in a change in American policy that is likely to elicit some kind of response. Another way you may see this is the tariff policy with the United States, which may have impact on people's jobs and livelihoods. And the United States is about to impose, or it says it's going to impose some major tariffs on two of our biggest trading partners in terms of Canada and Mexico. The Trump administration did say it was going to begin having 25% tariffs on all goods from Canada and Mexico about a month ago, but that was suspended for 30 days. And the president recently announced that these are going to go into effect on March 4th. There was also a 10% tariff placed on China, and the president said that these will double in March as well. And that's going to have impacts on all kinds of things where people are engaged in their work or in trade with the United States. We may notice some of this at home because all kinds of things like car parts and medical devices, agricultural goods, clothing, all of these things are going to be affected. The United States has also placed a tariff on steel and aluminum at a 25% rate. Now, the US always has tariffs on other countries. This is common throughout all administrations. Generally, what has happened is that particular products like steel and aluminum have been targeted, but not countries as a whole in general. So the actions that are planned to enact tariffs, big tariffs of 25% on goods from Canada and Mexico, are particularly significant and uncommon for the United States to impose upon its major friends and trading partners. And Canada and the U.S., I mean, sorry, Canada and Mexico are two of the U.S. The United States' biggest trading partners. So again, you're probably going to, or you might find that you're encountering people who have opinions on this, and they might be impacted in some way by US tariffs. And you may find yourself being asked from time to time to talk about things like trade policy, right? There are other ways you may see this as well, right? The United States has announced that it's withdrawing from the World Health Organization and also withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. And so these are ways in which, again, U.S. engagement with the world is going to be changing, right? The U.S. is the biggest funder of the World Health Organization. So people who are involved with that are fearful that efforts to do things like detect and respond to diseases or outbreaks of infectious diseases are going to be diminished, as will certain medicines and vaccines, because the United States has been a big funder for this. It could also have an impact on the supply chain for certain products that have been paid for by the United States. And of course, one of the things that may come up as a result of this is that global health priorities, when representatives from around the world are meeting to talk about these kinds of things, the American approach and the American perspective or American interests, right, may not be taken into consideration, right? And so there's concerns that if you don't have a lot of countries or all countries participating in this as much as possible in this kind of planning and preparation, that you get significant gaps. And the absence of the United States would be a big gap. And again, with the Paris Climate Accord, this is one, certainly uh, anytime you're reading any kind of, news article or, or watching news on TV, you may hear something come up about climate change in one way or another. And so the United States withdrawing from this agreement after it had, signed on to it in 2015, then withdrawn during the first Trump administration, the United States rejoined again during the Biden administration, and now again it's withdrawing. So this is another one of those things that is very noticeable in terms of how the United States is interacting with the rest of the world. Okay, so what does this mean for you? What do you think you're going to see? Now, the good news is I don't expect to see a lot of changes to individual travelers. Now, one of the things that I have always noticed from, even my own experience and the experience of others here around the university, work, and all kinds of things, is that um, people overseas, when Americans travel overseas, and I'm sure all of you have engaged this in one form or another, they've usually been very, always been very welcoming and really been great to American travelers, always making or almost always making a clear distinction between our government and its citizens. And I've certainly found this to be true personally. Everywhere I've gone, from Cuba to China and Egypt or Central America, Israel, South Africa, all kinds of places like this. Um, People really want to engage, right? There aren't reports, and there aren't reports right now of American travelers abroad getting harassed. That kind of thing just isn't happening when individuals are going overseas. So I think you can expect to continue to be received really well. And I think what you're going to find is that people are going to want to talk to you even more so than usual, than you found in the past, about the US. They're going to want to know what you think. They're going to want to try and understand what our country is doing and why it's doing things differently by engaging in conversations with you. And they're going to want to talk. I mean, I always find this, and I always find people incredibly well informed about the United States. I remember when I was in Cuba one time, many, many years ago, and everybody there could talk about, laws and rules that the Americans had passed and things that they were doing with regard to foreign policy with Cuba. They knew the names of individual senators and cabinet officials in a way that Americans just, weren't as aware and cognizant of things that were going on in Cuba. But the United States has a really big footprint. It has an outsized interest and impact on things going on all over the world. And so people, when they get a real live American on hand, right? It's like encountering an endangered species, right? They're going to get you on hand. They're going to want to talk to you and hear from you and know a little bit more about you. So I think one of the things um, that you may want to do or that you may find may be helpful to you is to have some thoughts on hand, some answers, some things that you would want to share, some stories that you might have that you think would serve you well and help you out in having conversations. Because I think you're going to find significant interest. And I think you're going to find people really wanting to engage in a very genuine way. It kind of occurs to me that this could also be helpful for conversations here in the States and at home with families and friends, right? We know that there's a lot of polarization in this country, and people are losing some of their relationships due to different political viewpoints. So, but I think you're gonna see this overseas, and being able to talk, because I think people will want to engage you, is going to be something you'll see. Now, while I don't think you're going to see poor treatment individually as an American, you might see some, not poor treatment, but not the friendliest attitudes toward Americans collectively, or toward the United States collectively. And what I mean is something like this, right? One of the things that some of you may have seen or noticed in the news is that when the United States teams, for example, have gone to places like Canada to play in the NBA, or there was some, NHL teams, or there was the U.S. national hockey team, for example, that was playing recently, and there have been boos by, say, Canadian audiences or foreign audiences at these games, sometimes when the American national anthem was being played. And so I do think you may find yourselves seeing some of that collective viewpoint that expresses some dissatisfaction or disappointment in the United States, and some way in which you may see this publicly. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're seeing things like particular t-shirts that people are wearing that have some kind of disparaging or hostile message on it about the United States or about President Trump or something like that. And I think that's going to be increasingly common over the course of the year as this goes on. So these are things I think that it's helpful to be prepared for as you're going. I don't think anyone is interested in targeting you as an individual and holding you as an individual accountable for the American government, but but um, but I think you'll see some of this collectively. I see a question here in the chat that says, would we have trouble getting through customs coming back if we picked up said attire? No, I don't think you're going to have trouble getting through customs if you pick up attire like that. I remember one time when I was in Cuba, I brought t-shirts back like of Che Guevara and stuff like this, and nobody nobody gave me a hard time. This was several years ago. But yeah, I mean, I think you can expect to buy the things you want and bring back things you want. And to the extent that the customs are looking through your bags, they're probably not going to notice the designs on all of your t-shirts or your hats or things like that anyway. But it's a good question, right? To what extent does that, um, you know, does an American official reaction kind of respond to things that may look disparaging to the American government from overseas? Now, one change that is unrelated to US politics and policy that you are going to notice if you travel to Europe is that starting at some point, later in 2025, probably in the summer or fall, there is going to be a new process for travel to Europe, a new added step involved. And so what's going to happen is that American citizens are going to need to apply for authorization from what is a new European Travel Information and Authorization System. You'll see this abbreviated as ETIAS. But this is going to be a new European system that's required to enter most European countries. So currently, citizens from the US can travel freely within the EU for up to 90 days for tourism or business without a visa. Now, this new ETIAS authorization, it isn't a visa, but it kind of acts a little bit like one, because what it means is that you're going to have to apply online before traveling to Europe in order to get this authorization. And then once you're in Europe, you're going to be able to move around the way that you have in the past. But it's a new way in which the EU countries are trying to manage and keep track of travelers coming into the Eurozone. So those are some of the things that you'll see. One of the things that we might notice here in the United States is the extent to which we may see fewer foreign travelers or fewer foreign students coming to the United States. Now, there hasn't been any data collected on this. It would be much too soon to see if that's really happening. But there have already been some surveys done around the world. So a couple of organizations put out some surveys, and what they found is a lot of people have said, who knows if they'll follow through with it, but a lot of people have said that they're planning to avoid travel to the US now that Donald Trump is in office. Now, it's one thing to say when a new president comes into office that someone may not like or may not agree with them. It might be one thing to say, well, I'm not going to go there. It's quite another if someone's planning a vacation and there's someplace they want to go in the United States, and whether or not they're going to allow, themselves to be influenced by who's the occupant of the Oval Office. That is, that's unclear at this point. But I think one of the things that will be noticed, and that President Trump uh, campaigned upon was in with regard to reducing immigration, right? And so, like I said, you're going to probably see fewer visas approved for foreign students or for travelers from certain countries, especially poorer countries. And so there may be fewer visitors. If you're in a place where you often see people from overseas, you may see some fewer visitors. I'm interested to see what this means for our applicants from overseas here here in OSU. So anyway, let me stop a little bit because I see a whole bunch of questions coming our way. Um, yes, Kate made the point. You may have a longer time getting through customs with more thorough security checks. I do believe that there will be some additional elements to entering in the United States, and so that's something that you may very well expect. What I'm also not sure about is the extent to which treatment of Americans traveling overseas. Sometimes if you're traveling to certain countries, because there are so many Americans going there somewhere, you may find that there are lines that allow Americans to move a little more quickly, and it's unclear if those kinds of things will remain. Um, all right, here's a question. It says, I'm concerned about flying. Plans are booked for a Rhine River cruise in a couple of months. The concern about flying, I guess, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. I see it was someone named Hazel who had put that question up. Are you
Hi.
thinking about safety?
Yeah, I might pop in on that one. That question has actually come up a bit about travel because of the recent news of the plane crashes that have happened, and as well as um, letting go of some of the staff that monitor the airways. And I'll say I've been looking into this issue too, especially since we're sending travelers out all the time. And air safety is of top concern. And air safety still stands actually to be the safest mode of transportation, way above car travel. So although it's getting more press, the safety side of air travel still remains very extremely safe. And so that is, of course, the messaging that is being relayed right now. But even though it has been in the news a lot more, it still has remained to be the safest mode of travel that we have.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Sorry to pop
absolutely.
in on that, David.
No,
I
no,
just,
that is an important addition to this, right? Because we've
yeah,
all seen these incidents in the news, and there was even a plane that returned just after taking off in Atlanta, I think yesterday or the day before, when they saw that there was like some smoke in the or what could have been smoke in
right.
the cabin, and so when you see these things, it quite rightly raises concerns.
It does. And then I was listening to, and I'm actually just forgetting his name at the moment, but he's well-known travel news journalist, and he did a special on it just last week, was talking about air safety. And I mean, he's in planes, I don't know, maybe 6 times a week. And he still was like, I'm 100% feel safe still flying in a plane. So it was good to hear it from his perspective as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another question in the chat too is about the UK ETA that's out there right now. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So the UK is doing something similar, right? Where there's an
Hmm.
electronic travel authorization to travel there as well. So there's going to be a similar kind of process for people
Yeah.
coming from the US to the UK. And in fact, people from the UK are going to have to use the EU's new system, the ETIAS, as well, because they're not together in the same system with regard to the travel authorization. So it's going to be a slightly different system
Yeah. And
when you're going to Britain.
the key thing for that one, especially now, because the UK system is starting, I believe, next month, or actually it just started. I think it's already active. It is starting now. The key is to know your flight and to know if you are going to be going through customs in the UK. If you are flying into London and you have to go through customs, that means that you have to leave the international terminal. In order to do that, you have to have the ETA completed and you have to do the ETA before you depart from the United States. I think it's a few days before. So, if you are flying into London or anywhere in the UK, you're doing customs there, you will have to have that finished so you can get on to your next flight. So be sure to definitely take care of that. And then the other one, as David was talking about, hasn't started yet, but
Right.
it will definitely start.
Yeah.
Then I'll disappear
And
again.
we can probably be safe in assuming that there will be some kind of app that
Yeah.
is out there. I think the British already have say on their website, like you can get the app and
Yep.
do it all through there. So it's all going to be as convenient as possible, but it's going to give you that kind of added authorization and another step you have to do beforehand. All right. Are there some other questions? I see a question here about travel to the UK. We see accounts of the UK government clamping down on speech violations by its citizens. To what extent are US travelers at risk for expressions we have made outside the UK or privately while in country? This would not be something I think is going to have to be a big concern for Americans traveling abroad. And certainly not for expressions you've made outside of the UK or privately while traveling in the country. And my sense is that the British government would not want that kind of incident with Americans who are traveling here. I do think there's this general sense of some kind of tension, right, in terms of thinking about politics and travel. I think for the most part, people are going to be able to just go on their travel and enjoy it in a way that they always have and really get a chance to engage another part of the world, maybe that you've visited before, or maybe that's brand new to you. And I think you're going to find that, that it's pretty welcoming. So with regard to the question about, worrying about freedoms in the UK, I would say that that's something that people can leave aside. This doesn't need to be a concern.
Yeah, and Barbara had another question come through the Q&A, and she wanted to know if having global entry will help ease any of these travel issues.
That is a good question. I don't know if any of that is going to change. I expect it's all going to work as it has before. But the interesting thing is where there where you begin to see slightly new procedures and slightly different changes or implementations to how something works. And sometimes you may just notice it in terms of longer lines or more
Hmm.
inconvenience. That's generally the way these things come up. I mean, you think about it, right? If you're in a line that, normally has 10 or 12 or 15 people in it, and they're handling, 5 people a minute or something like this, if it goes down to 4 people a minute, in a few hours, that line is backed up, at the end of the
Yeah.
airport is what happens. And so when procedures change, if they do, that slow things down a little. And I don't know if the global, what's it called, global entry, is going to change with that at all. I'll let you know. I'll find out. I've got 2 trips planned for work, one in March and one in June, that are taking me overseas. So I'll find out how all this looks. I'll be off in Nigeria in a few weeks and in the Dominican Republic. So I'll be sure
Yeah,
to
and
report back.
I'll be off to Italy in about a month too, so I'll be able to report back on that as well. Another question came through the Q&A that says, what is a polite way to decline to discuss politics with folks that you meet abroad?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think all you got to just say, this is all really interesting to me too, and I find it absolutely fascinating. But I also find that it is something that really gets people's passions excited, and I am interested in talking and engaging with people in your country about other things as well. So I'd really like to learn more about your own country, and I would just say throw some questions about their own country and things that you like and really appreciate. You can start to engage a conversation that way and easily direct it. But you can say, and sometimes you'll find that there's an opportunity. It's like, oh, who needs to talk about politics? That's always enough to go on. This is why I'm on vacation. I'm so fascinated, and there might be something right in front of you, a big monument or building or historical figure or something like this, that you're probably going to have lots of opportunities to quickly change the subject. Um,
Yes.
with just a little bit of a laugh or a quick comment.
Humor and deflection work great.
Yeah.
Victoria wanted to mention, and that she makes a really good point, that global entry and clear systems, they really only help us when we're coming back from the States. When
Yeah.
you're going other way, except for in some places, in Dublin, you go through US Customs in Dublin
Yeah.
before you head back to the States. So in those types of situations, they do
Yeah.
help, but you're right.
And in
Otherwise,
Bahamas as well, you'll see that you go through U.S. customs before
yeah.
you come into the U.S., right?
Yeah, definitely. And then we had another question, and this is a good one for you. Do you have any thoughts or comments on safety regarding traveling to Russia right now? Any idea about the travel levels being lowered by the US government, or just kind of what's your opinion on traveling to Russia?
Yeah, my own view is that I certainly wouldn't recommend anyone traveling to Russia at this point. Um, there does seem to be a change in the offing that's just begun between the new American administration and the government of Russia, and it may not be quite as hostile as it has been over the last few years, and so that may change, and to the extent that there might be some resolution on the war in Ukraine, that could have a change as well. But at the moment, things are considering the past few years, considering that the policies of the United States are rapidly evolving and changing. And in fact, the president of Ukraine is expected to arrive in Washington, D.C. tomorrow to meet with President Trump and possibly sign an agreement with the United States involving rare earth minerals and U.S. Integrate, collaboration with Ukraine. There's just so much that's up in the air. And considering the record of people that have traveled to Russia and not fared terribly well. And while it was a couple of years ago, we all remember the story of Brittany Griner, right? That
Mm,
it is easy in a country like Russia to become a pawn if there is some kind of political differences between the two countries. And certainly Brittany Griner got caught up in that. I really want to go to Russia one day. I'm not going to go just yet. I've had a number of students over the years from Russia. And it just seems like such a fascinating place. Some of my colleagues have traveled there and lived there in the past. But it's not a place I would recommend. I would say if you want to go overseas for fun and see some interesting new things that you haven't seen, hold off on that one for now would be my recommendation.
yeah, good recommendation. I would concur. Couple things popped through. One was from a fellow traveler, Erica, uh, just wants to give you some really great advice that the ETA process for the UK is it's quick and easy to do, but that's highly suggested that you do it at least 3 days before you go, because sometimes it can take a little bit to get it through the system. So definitely think far and further ahead to do your ETA. So Erica, thank you for that advice. And then Tom has a question. Do you see that one?
Yeah,
Okay,
I like
so
that question from Tom about travel to certain countries, one current source to check is the Department of State travel guidance, and that's for sure. And this Department of State is a good resource. And the Department of State is going to be very conservative in terms of what they say. And those recommendations uh, tend to be, very risk averse, right? Because they don't want to tell anyone like, yeah, yeah, you'll be fine, and then have something happen that they should have been warning American citizens about. The State Department travel guidance also serves another purpose in American foreign policy, which is why it's always good to seek out multiple sources for what you want to know. Because one of the ways in which, kind of unofficially and informally, the United States uses its travel guidance is as a way to push and prod countries into pursuing some policies that the United States wants them to pursue. And so it might be, you might see more you might see descriptions and travel advisories that are particularly worrisome, but they're not just directed to American travelers, but to the governments of those countries themselves, saying, look, we're going to encourage Americans to stay away unless we see some things we want out of you. And that's not anything you're going to see officially acknowledged. But when I've talked to some of my friends who've worked for the State Department and other people who've worked in DC, and I spent some time working in DC, that did seem to, at least in some small, maybe tacit way, be part of what's going on here. Nonetheless, I think that the State Department travel advisories are really important, and I would always recommend that you get on the STEP registry
Mhm.
program as well. What
Yes.
does STEP stand for again, Kate? Smart Travelers something program?
Program? Yeah.
And it's just a way of letting the American Embassy know and the State Department know that you're traveling overseas over in
Yeah.
certain dates. And there are a number of programs where you can get various kinds of travel insurance that can be helpful if you need to get out of a country quickly, for example. And so all of those kinds of things are recommended. If you're taking a big trip overseas, you spend some time planning, it takes a lot of money. Those insurance programs tend
Yes.
to generally be worth it.
Exactly. I'm putting in chat right now the link to the STEP program. It's the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. So we were close. Definitely suggest it. I do it when I travel. And then also, one other thought that I learned too is when you're looking at the different advisories, it's also good to check out what travel advisories are from other countries. So what is the UK saying? What are different countries in Europe saying? What are their travel advisories for other countries? Just to be able to get a multiple viewpoints on that. Um, we've got some
Yeah,
other
that's a
great
great
questions.
recommendation.
Yeah. Um, you got the State Department is not, oh, you want to just go ahead and take that
Oh, yeah. The
one. Go
State
on.
Department is not immune to the austerity measures being implemented through executive orders. So, how do you see resources for citizens traveling abroad being impacted? That is a great question. And at this point, the largest termination of programs has been with USAID with regard to overseas programs. But considering that there are a number of agencies and the United States government's Office of Personnel Management has been, going through a pretty aggressive process of saying laying off probationary employees, which means people who've been working less than, I think, a year or two for the federal government. So there are a lot of these things going on, and where that may impact Americans overseas, is with regard to consular affairs. The kinds of services that are available to Americans who are traveling or living overseas, and when they need some kind of service, sometimes an emergency service where they need help from the U.S. Embassy or the U.S. Consulate. That is a great point that I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see some of those services diminished over time. And it hasn't happened yet, but things are moving quickly with the new administration, and so it might be something that we see at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, we had one other question come in, and I'm going to start this off, but I want your opinion on this too, David. The question from Paul was, is it safe to travel to Egypt? And I just want to start it off by saying I went to Egypt this past fall and had an amazing experience in Egypt. It was great. And if you've heard about traveling to Egypt, you know that when you go, you have escorts. You have police escorts, tourist police escorts that are with you on your tour. So they are armed tourist police escorts on the trip. And David went on one of our Egypt departures as well. And we talked a little bit about foreign policy and what was going on in the world when we were in Egypt with Egyptians. And it was really interesting to listen to at least one of the perspectives. And that was that Egypt has such a long, long history of fighting as well as changes in policy regimes. So throughout Egypt's life, like it's constantly one ruler, then another ruler, then another ruler, then another ruler from all over the place. And one of the temperament and feedback that we got was Egypt just wants to be happy. It wants to just be calm. It doesn't want to get in the middle of it, and it just wants to be Egypt. So I thought that was very interesting because they have just this history of so many changes of leaders that right now they just kind of just want to be. But what do you think, David? That was
No,
just
I
what
was
we heard from
very
them.
happy to get to go to Egypt on what is an absolutely wonderful trip that the OSU Alumni
Hmm.
Association arranges and hosts, and it is done beautifully.
Thank you.
Um, it was absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that I found about Egypt, and kind of the way I was just describing being received in other countries, is there is an incredible welcoming feeling
Hmm.
when you are in Egypt for Americans and tourists from all over the world. I think one of the things that, even just meeting people on the streets and the markets and stuff like this, there's this
Hmm.
incredible awareness among the population that they host this incredible civilization from the past and that this history, which they get to proudly claim, is something that everybody wants to share, it seems,
Hmm.
with people from around the world. I mean, there really isn't in it an ancient culture that left so much for the rest of the world to see now, thousands of years later. And it is endlessly fascinating. And it's because of that, what you see in Egypt, that there's a real welcoming effect. I would say it's perfectly fine and safe to travel in Egypt. And again, the tours that the Alumni Association does, right, in thinking about security in Egypt, they have a tourist
Hmm.
police force as
Hmm.
well. And one of these members of the police force was always on our bus wherever we were going. I would strike up conversations with him and got to talk to him about things all the time. Um, People were just very warm and wonderfully genuine. And one of the things I love about the culture, I found this to be true in the old city of Jerusalem as well. And that is when you go into a shop or you meet someone on the street, there's this real warmth of, oh, come on in, let's talk here. And oh my goodness, here, let me pour you some tea. And, it might be a jewelry shop or something like this. And they'll say, oh, who are you here to buy for? And it's like, well, my wife and kids. Like, oh my goodness, you have kids. How wonderful. And I told them I have two boys. Like, oh, you're so blessed with two sons, right? Whatever it is. Um, in Egypt, I think this is a place where you should feel very, very comfortable traveling. They are so accustomed to tourists and to taking care of tourists and to ensuring that the tourists continue to come. And whether you go as the way I've heard it described is whether you go as a tourist or as a traveler, right? Where
Hmm.
you're just kind of off on your own and kind of
Hmm.
blazing your own path, or whether you're with a more formal tour. Um, Egypt is really one of the best places in the world at knowing how to accommodate large numbers of people who want to come see things that people have been talking about for, thousands of years, right? And certainly,
Yeah, it's their top industry in Egypt is tourism. So they're gonna do, whatever they can to make sure that tourism is safe and accommodating. And they really felt it during the pandemic. Like, so many different places felt it during the pandemic. And even this last fall when we were there, the numbers aren't up. They just weren't up where they were used to, which was nice for us because not so many people were at the sites. But for Egypt, they really they need more tourists back. So they're trying on that.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, can I just plug one more time for this
yeah,
this this Egypt program that the
I'm
alumni
not paying him,
association?
by the way.
Yeah. But you get to see all the pyramids and the tombs and the monuments, and you sail up the Nile. If any of you saw the movie from a few years ago, Death on the Nile, right? You're at Abu Simbel
Yeah.
and you're traveling to Luxor and all of these incredible sites. It's really something if you haven't gotten a chance to do it and it's a place that interests you, this is a great way to
Yeah.
go.
So Catherine was mentioning about the electronic system for travel authorization into the United States. Um, so I think Catherine's statement is that just anybody has to apply for that if you're not a US citizen, that we have our own form. I believe
Correct.
that's what her is. Do you want to say anything about that form or if there's going to be changes to it?
I don't know if there's going to be changes to that. I think that we can expect that there will be changes for people trying to come into the United States. And I will have some firsthand information to report on this because one of my students from Bangladesh is off traveling to get her mom to bring her here to the United States. And
Mm,
it's unclear if they have to go for the interview for the visa while she's there. And it's unclear what the procedures are going to look like and to what extent the interviews may look different than they have in the past. But I think it's safe to expect that the process for people from other countries, if there's someone who you know who wants to be coming to the United States, it would be wise to advise them to start on the process
mhm,
incredibly early to make sure that they get all the documentation they need to come to the United States. Because I will not be surprised to see people turned away at the
mm,
border, especially from certain countries, right? I mean, I think people coming from Europe and Japan, for example, are not likely to have problems coming into the United States. But if somebody's coming, say, maybe from South America, or the Caribbean, or an Asian, South Asia or Southeast Asian country, something like that, there may be some
mhm.
additional barriers in the way of as the year goes on.
It's good to know. Judy is wondering if you could talk a little bit about traveling to countries that used to receive aid through USA ID and they are no longer. And do you think they're going to have a negative impact on tourism to those countries that are not any longer receiving US aid?
I think that again, what you're going to find if you go to countries that are going to see some of these aid programs cut is that I think you're going to find a lot of people who are 1 or 2 degrees away of separation away from someone who was directly impacted by this. Maybe somebody working there, somebody who was getting some kind of assistance in one way or another. And to the extent that Americans begin to feel less welcome because of that, again, I don't think anyone's going to, take their anger out on you. But to the extent that Americans are feeling less welcome, I imagine that sentiment will become well known, and that could have some impact. But I think what's more likely, again, like I was saying earlier, is that people are going to want to ask you about it. They're going to say,
Mhm.
"What is your country doing, and why?" Again, one of my students, she's from Nigeria, and she said, "Why would the Americans cut a health program that's like helping?" Moms take care of their babies and make sure they're born healthy or that they have enough nutrition. Like, why would you do that? Like, I don't understand. And so you may get some of those kinds of questions is what I think you're going to see. Um,
Yeah. With those questions too, it's always good to know both sides of the argument so
yeah,
you can just have a more intelligent conversation about it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. We're getting close to 6:30. So if anyone has any other last minute questions, this has been a wonderful conversation so far. While I'm waiting just a minute to see if anyone has any more questions, want to remind people that if you have not gotten your real ID yet, um, get it or make sure you have your passport or another, there's a couple other forms of federal government ID that you can use, but you will not be able to fly domestically without one of those approved form of identification or your real ID driver's license.
And
So,
oh, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
And remember, if you are traveling somewhere and your passport is due to expire within 6 months of the time that you are traveling, you should absolutely get a renewed passport before you go. Sometimes there
Yes.
are problems with crossing borders if your passport is close to expiration. And there was a question about the State Department's capacity due to austerity measures, right? And personnel cuts. And that may be one place, with the U.S. Passport Office where you may see some diminished capacity over time. And so it could take more time to get the passport. My own son's passport expired
Yeah.
recently. I said, go get one. I said, but pay the extra, or I'll pay the extra, right?
Yeah.
To get it expedited because it may take a little longer than usual if there's, because there's just some confusion and disarray in the government agencies.
That's very true. We were already advising folks to do this ahead of time and take a little bit longer because the system hadn't even gone back up from the pandemic. So now it might even take a little bit longer. So
Yeah.
definitely do think ahead. And the other side of that is extra pages. There are certain countries that require a specific number of blank pages in your passport, not only the 6 months, but page count. So if you're really running low on pages on your passport, that is another reason
Hmm.
to go ahead and get a new one. And you can always pay extra to get more pages put into your passport. You
Right.
can get a bigger one.
Yeah.
So if you're a frequent traveler, which I know a lot of Oregon Staters are, it's amazing where you all have been. That might be something that you will want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But overall, I would say my message is get out there and travel, go enjoy it. It's going to continue to be, a great and enriching experience. And, while the world is changing around us and sometimes quite rapidly, it's not going to, I don't see it getting in the way of our ability to do the things we love to do and to get out and see the world.
Yes, me too. Yeah, I know. And I'm excited to still get out there as well. So it'll be fun. Well, thank you very much, David. I really appreciate you joining us today. And don't worry, y'all, we'll get David back on another tour eventually soon. So he's a great one to have with us while we're traveling. And just remind a couple people that you can find us, of course, online, call our offices, and we do. Some people are boycotting it, but we do still have a Facebook page. So if you are in Facebook, we are there. And if you have any questions about travel, feel free to reach out. Thank you. And everyone, have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Kate. Have a good night.
Bye bye.
Bye.